Here's an article from the website Right Wing Watch. Headline, Family Research Council, Destruction of Education Department is Chance to Push Religious Indoctrination in Schools. This article is written by Peter Montgomery, and here's just a little bit of it. Quote, the religious right group Family Research Council promoted an excited letter to supporters Thursday saying that President Donald Trump's dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education could be a, quote, game changer for FRC's efforts to bring faith and the Bible back to public schools. And the article includes a link to the actual letter that is referenced there that was sent out to Family Research Council supporters by the president of the Family Research Council, Tony Perkins, who has been the president of the Family Research Council for about the last 20 years and is following in the august footsteps of such right-wing luminaries as Gary Bauer, if you remember that contemptible little worm, and also James Dobson, who technically I don't think was ever actually president of the Family Research Council, but he's one of the founders of it, and it used to live under the umbrella of his Focus on the Family group. So there you go. That's who Tony Perkins is. And the latest in a long line of Christian nationalist right-wing shitheads following up behind fucking James Dobson and Gary Bauer, among many, many others. Those are just the two names I happen to know off the top of my head. But let's look at this letter that Tony Perkins sent out about ending the Department of Education and why Christians like him, hardcore right-wing evangelical Christians like him, should be super excited about the potential end of the federal Department of Education. First of all, check out the letterhead there. That is the seal of the Family Research Council with the graphic of the United States Capitol enclosed in the circle. Don't you love how these Christian nationalist, anti-government, right-wing people are always banging on and on and on about how evil the government is, how the government is a threat, how the government is your enemy, how you shouldn't trust the government, and yet look how eager they are to borrow gravitas by incorporating government-like iconography into their own symbols. You can't trust the government, but you can trust us, and to prove it, let's try to make ourselves look as much like the government as possible. Anyway, the letter begins, Dear friend. You can always trust somebody who begins a form letter with Dear friend. It's the personal touch, I think. Last week, President Trump once again made waves in Washington and across the country with news that he intends to sign an executive order to, quote, abolish the Department of Education. Interesting that he felt he had to put the word abolish in quotes there. Abolish, or maybe not, abolish, something like that. While the department cannot be completely abolished apart from an act of Congress, dismantling or even just reducing its size could be a game changer. Game changer not only in boldface type, but also italicized. For years, the federal bureaucracy has enforced policies that silence parents and flood schools with agendas hostile to biblical truth. When was this silent parents era? Because I certainly have not lived through that. I mean, any of you with children who have been to PTA meetings or involved yourselves in school activities with your kids over the years? Do you recall this silent parents era? Do you recall parents of the political leanings of Tony Perkins, these right-wing Christian parents? Have they ever been silent? When have they been silent? I think what he's talking about is they haven't always gotten their way. And that's really what right-wing people mean. And it's the same thing with freedom of speech when they complain about how their freedom of speech has been quelled. Their voices have been silenced. That's what they mean. They don't mean they haven't been allowed to speak. They don't even mean that they can't get people to listen to them when they speak. What they mean is they speak, and then the thing they were speaking about wanting to happen doesn't happen. That's what they mean. That's what they feel is an unacceptable intrusion on their liberty. Not when they're not allowed to speak, but when they don't get their way. Unacceptable. Let's skip down a little further. This paragraph is entirely in boldface. This must be important. Even as people wait to see what Trump will do at the federal level, right now, across the country, a movement is growing to eliminate radical ideologies from public school curricula and bring fundamentals like the Ten Commandments back into kids' classrooms. While fundamental to our nation's founding and a critical part of childhood education in America for many years, in the mid to late 20th century, the Supreme Court began issuing a series of misguided rulings that slowly but surely eroded the influence of God, prayer, the Bible, and even the Ten Commandments in public schools. With God, the Ten Commandments, and biblical truths out of the way, the left had ample room to push their radical LGBTQ indoctrination plan onto our children. Yes, the infamously left-wing United States Department of Education. Never mind how historically inaccurate it is to say that the Ten Commandments and God used to be these fundamental parts of American government and education, when that is very much not the case. And now it's just a travesty that they've all been completely removed. Prayer is not illegal in public schools. This is another case of, well, we don't get to do what we want, or things aren't the way we want them to be, therefore we have been persecuted, therefore we have been silenced. You can pray in public schools. When Christians like this complain about prayer being taken out of school, what they're complaining about is the end of compulsory prayer. That's what the Supreme Court took away, and it never should have been there in the first place. That's what's not allowed. A teacher or an administrator or some authority figure working for the school is not allowed to compel students to pray. That's what they want to bring back. They want to bring back compulsory religion, their religion specifically. That's what they object to losing. They don't want to just have the Ten Commandments be studied as a part of culture or as a literary document or even as a historical document, as a document that has had influence, as it undeniably has, on the evolution and the development of Western culture. They don't want that. That's not good enough for them. If you're going to have the Ten Commandments in school, it has to be as the unquestioned authority of the one true God. It has to be presented as not even a religious document, but as a fact, as a historical fact that God himself handed this list of things to Moses, and now we are all bound to observe and respect these rules. That's what they want. If you say, well, no, they can talk about the Ten Commandments in school, it just has to be within an educational context. It has to be analyzed as literature or analyzed as a part of history or as a part of culture, as a part of like a world religion course where we're comparing maybe moral codes between different faiths to have a better understanding of what different people believe and the different things that various faiths might have in common, right? That's no, not that. We don't mean that. We mean hang the Ten Commandments on the wall and tell the kids these are the rules that God himself has issued for all of us to follow because our religion is the one true religion and you all have to follow it. That's what they're talking about. Anyway, moving on. Now, as parts of our culture begin shifting back to common sense and biblical truth, believers like you and me have an opportunity to stand up and help reaffirm the moral foundations on which our nation was built. Will you stand with us to help bring faith and the Bible back to public schools? Your support today educates lawmakers, equips parents, and emboldens churches to lead this charge. And that's when you realize as you read this, if you didn't realize already, and you probably should have, because up at the top, right next to the seal of the Family Research Council, is this big blue donate button. And once you get to the part of it that I just read, you realize, again, if the donate button itself wasn't enough of a tip-off, oh shit, this is a fundraising letter. All this highfalutin talk about we must reclaim the public schools in the name of God for the sake of our children and for the sake of our nation. We must put God and the Bible and the Ten Commandments back into the schools. We must allow our children to pray again. Pray to Jesus Christ, the one true God, right? That's just a pitch. It's just a pitch. I'm not saying he doesn't really believe this shit. I'm sure he does. But his purpose in sending this letter is not to tell people, hey, we need to take our country back for God. We need to rally together as Christians and take back our public schools for the sake of our nation's soul. He just wants your money. That's all this is. He just wants your money. He mentions it again. FRC, the Family Research Council, has long championed the need for churches to start private schools and launch faith-based alternatives to public education. Schools where God's word is more than historical context of our nation's founding or a general ethical context. It is the complete worldview in which reality and life itself are grounded. Your generosity, click that donate button, will expand this effort, providing support and resources like why every church should start a Christian school to pastors and churches across the country. When you partner with FRC today, and when we say partner, we don't mean any kind of legal partnership. We just mean a one-sided partnership where you give us your money and we take it. You and I, as a team, only not really, can work to ensure that every child has access to an education grounded in God's truth, whether in public classrooms or Christian schools. So, first of all, think about how nefarious this is. He wants to take over public education in the name of his God. He wants to use public schools to force his version of Christianity on everybody. And he also wants to encourage more churches to start their own Christian private schools. He wants to spread his version of his religion to everybody in every way possible. Think of how insidious that is. But also think of how insidious this whole letter is. In the guise, and granted, it's a very thin guise, it's a very easily seen through guise, but in the guise of a rallying the troops kind of letter, right? Oh man, what a great opportunity we have to serve the Lord and take back public schools. What he's really doing is using all of that as a way of saying, give me some money. Give me some money. You want to praise God? You want to serve the Lord? You want to help your kids have a biblical education and fight back against these radical ideologies, which apparently just means gay and trans people. That's all they mean anymore. 50, 60 years ago, when they said that, they meant black people. When Christians back then said, we need to return God to public schools, and we need to return people to a biblical worldview, and we need to keep these radical ideologies out of our children's classrooms. Back then, they were talking about black people. And I'm sure they'll get around to talking about black people like that again eventually if we let them. But for now, when they say radical ideologies and leftist agendas infecting public schools, they're talking about gay people and trans people. And the agenda and the ideology is students being told, or just not having it even contradicted, that gay people and trans people exist. That's the radical ideology to the Tony Perkinses of the world. Not even teaching them anything about gay people or trans people, not even any detail, not even no queer history classes, nothing like that. Just, oh, yes, as a part of reality, queer people exist. And we as educators will not deny that or hide that from students. They exist, including the ones who are students here at this school. They exist. They're real. And they deserve the same respect as everybody else. Queer agenda, leftist agenda, radical ideology. And if you want to put a stop to that, give me some money, says Tony Perkins. It's a grift. It's a grift. As much as all religion, I don't want to say all religion, but as much as a lot of religion, especially modern religion, especially in this country, is a grift. This is such a grift. You believe in God? You want to do the right thing by God? You want to do God's work? You want to help me do God's work? Give me some money. That's all it is. Give me some money. And I'm not saying anything new here. I'm not breaking any ground by pointing this out, but I do think it's worth pointing out occasionally that these are the kinds of people that have been elevated by the Republican Party, by conservatism in general, as the religious leaders, as the Christian leaders of the modern American society. People like Tony Perkins, people who, yeah, they'll mention religion. They'll talk about God and Jesus and all that stuff. They'll talk about how important the Bible is. Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure maybe deep down in their hearts, they really believe that. But it's all just part of the sales pitch to them. They just want to get the money out of your wallet. They're not concerned with saving your soul, unless after you get your soul saved, you decide that you don't need to save that $50 that you had laying around and you can just go ahead and send it to Tony. And then he can use it for whatever the fuck he uses it for, and he'll keep a little bit left over so he has enough for the printing costs or the email server costs to send out more letters like this. And just keep that cycle rolling and keep that money rolling in. Because if I, as an atheist, may presume to paraphrase the Bible, Christians like Tony Perkins, Christian grifters like Tony Perkins, they never change. They are the same. Yesterday, today, and forever.